we will get back in a few minutes to the next session. Our next speaker is going to be Sanne Peters, and it will be all about naming things. And that's a story about I have seen things, horrible things, things that were incomprehensible, mind-boggling code or designs elements and so on. And yeah, everyone probably have seen those situations, when you're just doing even a simple code review and you're trying to understand what's that variable for, what's the name of that class, what it means, just like a mess of characters, and that's it. It's not descriptive. That's from one side. And from the other side, I'm sure that at least once you saw an amazing code that even doesn't require a lot of commands because all the names there are clear. So Sanne Peters is gonna present us this art of giving names to the objects. That will happen in 2 minutes. Meanwhile, I would like to remind you that, first of all, this is one of the first ever online events that is happening completely online. We're not pre-recording it, we're doing it on the go. And our goal is actually to connect people from all over the world. So to make everyone able to get some knowledge without being dependent on your current location. So you're not anymore dependent. You're not anymore dependent on expensive tickets and trying to get some visas and so on. And there's just a small amount of people that can get that. Now everyone can get the knowledge. In order to do that, we're asking you to provide your help and translations to the local languages so that our videos can be translated to more and more languages and shared to more and more people. And now I would like to introduce you Sanne Peters. Hi, Sanne, how are you?
Hi, very good, thank you.
How's it going?
Quite well, actually. Yeah, it's nice. It's nice weather over here, and then actually, just heard from you that you were in Kiev, so it's kind of the same weather, I guess.
Well, yeah, it's raining for like a few weeks already.
It's over here.
How's it going in Israel?
Sorry?
How's it going at your location?
I am actually in the Netherlands, so not Australia.
Okay, you're in Netherlands. Sorry.
Yeah, so I'm still in Europe. So.
Okay, what's the weather in Netherlands?
Oh, wow, very well.
Sunny.
Yeah.
Sunny.
The weather, just like I said, sunny. Very, very nice weather, actually. About 20 degrees centigrade, something like that.
Oh, so it's not quite like not quite the usual weather, as I understand.
The Dutch weather is all over the place anyway, so it's like...
Yeah, I understand. All right, tell us a few words about yourself, and let's start your presentation.
Just a question. Do I just click share screen to share stuff?
Yeah, you can share your screen, and then I'll add it to the stream once you start. So yeah. What's your overall experience in Node.js, and why you actually have chosen Node.js as your language?
Well, actually, I'm more of a front-end developer, but I came from data science. So I did have a lot of experience with command line usage and data analysis. And in that case, I actually use more of Python than actual Node.js. But these days, because I do a lot of front-end development, it feels easier and more natural to use Node.js for data processing and stuff like that. So my actual experience with Node is surprisingly limited, but I do know all about the data processing. I really like the previous presentation about the piping and everything. Like, I didn't even know it was possible. So,
all right, that's great. Can you actually? Yeah, now I'll
share.
I can edit here. By the way, how's your name pronounced? Is Sanne or Zanne?
Sanne.
Sanne. Okay. Yeah. All right. Good luck. At the end of the presentation, I'm gonna show you a signal that 5 minutes left, then 2 minutes left, and 1 minute left. And then we're gonna move to the next speaker, but after that, we'll have a Q&A session, so we're collecting questions right now. Thanks, that's Sanne Peters, and let's go. Naming things.
Thank you. Well, welcome everyone. This presentation is about naming things, of course. But so my name is Sanne Peters, and I'm a front-end architect at Bunkai. And Bunkai is basically a tiny design firm that also deals with more complex subjects like microchips and stuff like that. So we do a lot of design application building for the more technologically oriented clients. So with that in mind, in my daily life, I work on design systems, design operations, the semantic web, and also data visualizations. And in all of these, I have to name things. So let's first point out the topics that I will discuss. First of all is why I care, and you should too. Then some theory, and that theory put into practice, because I like to make my presentations practical. I'd like to start with this quote, actually. There are only two things hard in computer science: cache invalidation and naming things. And I bet that most of us have heard of this saying before. And I kind of like it because it points out how deceptively tricky this subject actually is. And on top of that, I have no clue how to invalidate cache. So let's just dive into naming things. So why I care, and you should too. So I'm going to talk about this from my own perspective and then use that as a segue to explain why you should care. So I have autism, which means that I have difficulty understanding something that is somehow implied or hinted at. But oddly enough, it also makes me really aware of these problems when they arise, and that they also actually might affect others. And this is why in communication in general, I appreciate clarity above anything else, because that way I will always understand what the other actually means. And using the right name for something is just really, really important in this. And this is why I care so much about naming things. The reason you actually should care is that using the right names for something makes communication in general clearer and easier to understand. And if you can just say what it's about, you're saving time. And I bet your bosses love it when you save time, because if you save time, you save money. But that just also brings some extra benefits, like it makes it accessible for everyone, despite their disabilities. So when you put that little bit of extra effort into properly naming something, you're not just showing you care about the quality, but also of the quality of what you're making, but also about the efficiency of everyone else in your team. So I think this is one of the main things that just is present in everyone's head, like, why is naming things so hard? Because we do get that it's hard, but not really why. And I think it's kind of my opinion, but it has been proven over the years, is that it is mostly about this actually. When we build things, the focus is really on getting things done. There are deadlines and stuff that we need to keep in mind, and that's just time constraints in general. And there's this extra thing that people are also really lazy. And that's why they try to find a way to do as least as possible, but still do the most important things, so stuff actually gets done. But there's a problem with that. That means that things like proper names for things and documentation in general tends to get a backseat. And this is, simply put, short-term thinking. Because the names you come up with still need to make sense. Like in 5 months from now, it's like what was just explained earlier. So, in other words, you really need to think ahead. And that is really hard. And the reason why this is hard is that a meaning of a name needs to remain clear even throughout time. And there are tricks you can use, and one of them is actually the field of semantics. So with that in mind, we're going to dive into a little bit of theory so you can get a little bit of a start in the way of thinking. And semantics is actually the philosophy of meaning. So it's not really science, because it's a way of thinking, and that's what philosophy is about. So semantics really talks about how things do not exist on their own, but always within a larger context. Like, I'm a person that lives in the world and do not exist on my own. And so what you could do is maybe put this more in our own business developer perspective, is to seek contexts like domains, like a nation's culture or certain industry. And each domain has its own name for things, like terms or some stuff that's actually the same in different areas, but simply has a different name. And those names within a domain are called a shared language. And you might actually have that already within a small part of your team or just between colleagues. So the shared language, sorry, getting a dry mouth. Is actually, well, said it wrong, sorry. So names allow us to discuss a subject without it being present. And that's very philosophical, I know, but I'm getting to it. For instance, if you want to talk about like John from accounting and how he's really into bonsai, I would really like to challenge you to try and do that with any use of names or even examples, because examples include names. So in other words, it's good to give it a name that makes sense to everyone on the team, and maybe even the organization as a whole. And that's really what shared language is. It's using the same names for the things that you describe in your team or your group. this is also true when we are building systems, like, for instance, when we're building systems in terms of code, or we're architecting an information flow. And those systems will inherently contain new components. And I'm using the term components very loosely. And those need meaningful names so they can be easily talked about. And those names are usually just new things, because that's what we do. We build new things, and that's why we need to come up with new names of things. And yeah, that's it. Sorry. So let's take that theory and put it into some examples, because I'm really terrible with just theory in general. I really like to have examples to talk about, especially when I used to do math in school. It was just theory. And only when I started to do it in physics, it started to make sense. So I'm a big fan of examples. So a very simple one. Take, for instance, me. My name is Sanne. But that's a really crappy way to describe who I am. Better ones, there would be, for instance, software architect Abankai, and that's within a work context. Another one, in a more of a family context, is the tall know-it-all, because I'm a bit of a person who corrects other people all the time, which I try to control, but it's hard, especially if they're wrong. So another example, and do keep in mind, I'm a front-end developer, so my examples tend to be a little front-end developer-y. So you have this variable called red, and okay, yeah, it makes sense, but does it really? Because it doesn't really say anything about what red is useful, what its purpose is, what its meaning is, besides that it is that color. But if you assign it to a variable that does make sense, like CTA color or call to action color, then suddenly that color red gets a meaning. And as soon as I start using that variable within my system, it's meaningful. People get why a certain thing has a certain color because it's a CTA color. Like a button might have that for some reason. So another example, UI components, because I'm a front-end developer and I like to show visual things. So it really happens a lot with me is that I get these UI components and the designer really doesn't think about if they should have a name and what name they could have. So I usually just pull them to my desk, or I do a video call these days and start talking about what I should call these things. And usually I get suggestions like USB block, but USB block is not really a good name because it does describe something about USB, yeah, because these are USPs, as in unique selling points. But they could easily have a different shape. And that's a problem with this type of naming, is that you're talking about shape and not so much about function. And I think that is the general guideline about choosing names, is to think about its function as opposed to what it looks like. So what it really shows here is the function of this thing is to give a summary of the unique selling point, basically explain it. just a little bit, and that's okay. But then you get into a situation that that the designer comes to you, but I really like to use it for other things like services, to give summaries about that, and then it just, or just explain things in general. And then that name starts to make no sense anymore because it's not a USB summary. So you have to come up with another name. And what I would like to do right now, because we do have a Q&A session, is to challenge you to come up with a decent name for this. And I will share our original name too, and maybe you can even come up with a better one. I really hope you do, because I love it when I'm wrong, oddly enough. And I will see who comes up with a really good name. So it's competition. So furthermore, functions are very different than variable names, because functions do something as opposed to store something and or represent something. And you should, these examples, I didn't put it in here, but these are like utility functions. So their context is, for instance, the entire application, because they're used everywhere. And you could make this function called sort names like this, like sort names, and then you put some names in there that get sorted and put out again. But when you really look at it, it's not really sorting names. It's just sorting strings. And maybe it should be called differently, because it's not always sorting them. It's sorting them in a very specific way, as in alphabetically. So maybe the function should be called sort alphabetically, and it just receives strings. And this is the way you should think about it. It's not terrible if it's wrong the first go. It's more like that in the end. It needs to be good, so people know what it's actually for. So some practical things to keep in mind. And these are just guidelines in general. Avoid colloquialisms, which is a very fancy English word for saying typically local ways of saying things. So don't say a dodgy way, but say it like a wrong way. So stay away from those very specific terms that most non-native English speakers just don't know. Or even if they're native English speakers, if you're using a very British English word, an American might not know what you're talking about. And also use simple words, because not everyone's level of English is that good. So I've seen a comment in the past that uses the word strenuous, and I realized that I could understand it, but I knew that two other people really couldn't understand strenuous and had no idea what it's about. And it basically means physically hard to do. But in other words, you could have just wrote down hard to do. Another thing to keep in mind is, and this is a debated one, and maybe I'll get some heated reactions, and that's fine. But stay away from abbreviations, and maybe make the name a little bit longer versus shorter. So maybe don't call a variable CMT, but just content management tool, because that way you won't have the question, hey, what's CMT? And that's just annoying, but people have to ask questions that could have just been taken care of by giving it a proper name. And also get some inspiration. Because in the end, naming things is a creative effort. It takes some mental power, and it's good to take shortcuts. So maybe reason from another's perspective, not your own. And that's slightly difficult because you have to put yourself in somebody else's shoe. And what I usually advise in this case is that that person should actually be a junior developer that is unfamiliar with all the terms that you use and all the parts of the system. Because if you reason from that perspective, you will cover all your bases. And maybe just ask a coworker or a friend. I remember being stuck on a name and it didn't make sense. And I asked my coworker, and we had a little discussion. It only took like 5 to 10 minutes, but then we came up with a better name because he just thinks differently than I do. And finally, iterate on the name. And that's a very designer thing to do. But when you come up with stuff, you basically are designing in a sense. And sometimes it just can be really hard to predefine all the functionality that will finally be in the thing that you're building. And even sometimes it might just be hard to define its actual purpose because it was not really described. And it could very well be that you're building it a certain way, but then somebody else just starts saying like, okay, yeah, but also need to do this. And then its purpose will change. So maybe just make your life a little bit easier to start with a working title and just update it throughout the development process. And what I actually use a lot is as a final inspiration point, if I just don't know anymore, if I have a really difficult word for something like that, I look it up in a thesaurus, which is basically a lookup book for synonyms. So sometimes there is a really easy word for something and I just can't get it in my head or remember it in general. And the other is actually the field of semantics, because there is a thing called schema.org, and most general things are actually defined there. So instead of trying to figure out how to call your own schema or your GraphQL schema or anything like that, maybe just use schema.org and just copy the shit out of it. Because why do it if somebody else has already done it? Well, that's basically it. And I do want to remind you of that thing that I asked you to do, that alternate name for that UI component. And I know this is a Node.js conference, but you can think about names, right? You can. So yeah, ask me anything. That's usually what I say. And you can find me on Twitter at Sunstreams, and I'll be present in the Q&A session. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much, Sanne. It was really amazing, and well, it was really full of philosophic approaches as well. I really like that, and people like that as well. It, probably one of the best thing was that it is like a completely different approach. You took the same thing that, well, everyone knows, right? Mm-hmm. About naming and importance and that, as well as almost everyone ignores it. Let's be honest. It happens quite often. Even if sometimes even people that actually would like to follow these rules, they don't have a possibility. We know that.
Well, yeah, and I know, but in the end, it's just about selling this idea and the thoughts about and behind it. And as soon as you start applying it, it starts to make sense. And the trick is really to get your whole team involved. And I'm not talking
All right.
about
Yeah.
developers. I'm talking about the designers, even the product owners at times.
Yeah.
Because they
Oh,
need to be
definitely. Yeah.
thinking about this. Because then you have this co-ownership, as you would say.
That's true. Well, as a project manager, I know that it's quite important for me as well, especially when I need this code to be readable by the other teams, let's say the support team or even the QA team, or even by my own team, but just like in a year. you
I've seen horrible. I'm gonna be honest about this. I've
Mhm.
made horrible things in the past, and I've looked at it, and I lost the whole afternoon trying to understand what in God's name I've just made there.
Cool.
But I've grown, and I've seen that I've become better, and I've gotten compliments about being better. That what I've written was good, and I was that really that it's kind of a validation that what you think about your philosophies make sense.
Thank you. That's really very very good. And yeah, people like that. I hope. Yeah, I see a lot of people from different countries. They are just writing bedankt, Sanne, dankjewel. Very good.
Down.
So I'm sure we'll be happy to see you on the Q&A session. There will be more questions about that. Now you can take some rest, and we also can take a rest for like 10 minutes. Tell us, please, how was your experience like on the first conference online?
Well, actually, this isn't my first online conference.
Oh, go
No,
for it.
I'm the first one. Yay!
Yay!
No, I did a previous conference in which everything was like pre-recorded, and that's kind of weird because it you feel a bit distant from everything,
Yeah.
and it just happens, and then you're in a QA session, and then it's magically over. But this feels more that I'm more involved. So I do like the live stream. It's a little bit tougher because I can't really have to do it right the first time.
Yeah, that's okay. There are some tips, by the way, how to handle it when you don't see the people's reaction, but you're actually like I would say your previous experience tells you to do that. So what I'm doing, I'm actually taking 3 different stickers. Now I have 3 packs of stickers, like red ones, green ones, and amber ones. And I put a little bit of reactions based on the 3 social groups, the how to say them, the ones that are making riots. I forgot about that. The ones that criticize. So you always in any audience, you always have people, the opinion leaders. You always have the people that are actually on your side, whatever you say. And you always have someone who's ready to criticize or just to stare at the phone, and something else. So what I'm doing is actually collecting a few different reactions based on that, like random reactions, but the ones that are from my previous experience, right? And I'm putting them on a table, and sometimes based on the timer, I would just take any of those stickers and say, okay, now I'm getting this reaction from, and this is the way to adjust my conversation. Give it a try.
Okay, so have your MIDI audience in front of you.
Yeah, I imitate it. It's better than nothing.
I can do that with little Lego people.
Oh, that would be even better, but I don't have Lego. That's the case. Okay, thank you. We are having a small break right now.
Okay.
And we're getting back in 7 minutes from this.